Hey, this is Seth, and in this video, I want to help inspire you to answer the question, what is school really good for? And do you need school at all to be a happy, successful, productive adult person? When I say school, you've heard me talk about skipping college. Have you ever thought about skipping high school, skipping middle school, skipping grade school? What about a life with no formal compulsory schooling at all? This is the topic that my guest who I'm interviewing today, Blake Boles, has dedicated his life to. He is what we would call an unschooler, which is a group of people in a movement that is all about reimagining education and understanding all the limitations and problems of the school system we've all experienced. We've all gone to school. We've all really not liked school in so many different ways. There's a whole movement of people that are reimagining what is possible through a new kind of way of educating young people. And Blake has been doing work for about 20 years, helping young people have really exciting, interesting, unconventional educational experiences. And I'm very excited to talk to him. I've actually followed his work for many years. So let's get right into it. Thanks for being here, Blake.
Hey, Seth. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. So why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about the work that you've been doing for the past 20 years.
Sure. I've written 4 books about how you don't need to go to school in order to become educated. And so the first one was about how you can go to college without going to high school. The second one, which I think you and I connected on the topic of, was better than college. And so how you can get an education without going to formal higher education. Third was about what self-directed learning looks like. And the most recent one was called Why Are You Still Sending Your Kids to School? And that's aimed more at parents. And outside of the writing, which has been very meaningful in a way to connect with lots of people, I've been running these small group programs for teenagers who choose not to go to school. And so most of them call themselves unschoolers. Others might attend these highly alternative schools that give them lots of flexibility. And every once in a while, I get the rogue public school student who just figures out a way to finagle 6 weeks off and will come down to South America with me, or to New Zealand or Nepal. I've been taking groups of teenagers on these long international trips since 2008. And each one is a little bit different. Each one is its own creation. But the big idea has been to give teenagers the experience of independent travel at a much younger age than most other people would typically experience it. It's been It's been really meaningful work for me, and it's the way that I pay the bills and support my writing habit also.
That's amazing, man. I mean, as I tell people, I wrote a book called Skip College for Success, and most of my audience is people in high school or college age. But I do get people in high school who are, or even younger, asking questions. I get people who are like 14 who are like, hey, can I get a digital marketing job? And I'm like, well, you can start learning digital marketing. You can't get an actual salary job depending on labor laws. But, I've wanted to have a resource to share with these young people. And, sometimes I have sent people to your book, and I think it's really amazing to be, giving people this type of an insight at that age. What is like the youngest student that you've worked with? Like, what's the youngest age group?
I typically work with 14 and up. Yeah. Before that, it's a little bit more tricky. You're not quite in this situation where you can take full authorship over your education, but I have definitely met 14 and 15-year-olds who are taking seriously full authorship over their educations, even though for most people that sounds kind of crazy.
It does sound crazy, and that's why it makes the most sense, guys. What we think is not crazy, this idea of just sitting in a classroom for 8-10 hours a day, year after year, not learning anything practical, is insane, but everybody else tells you that it's normal. And I have this young student named James in Australia who already got a digital marketing job at age 16. And it inspires me. And what you're telling me inspires me, because I think that education really dumbs things down. I think it makes people less intelligent. And I'm excited about what's possible when you actually give a 14-year-old practical life experience and life skills outside of the classroom. So I'm just curious, you said you go to South America a lot. Like, what do you do? Like, if I was a skeptic, if I was somebody saying, well, how can you take these kids out of school at 14? They need to learn history and geography, and they need to learn about, magma rock and all these other things in earth science. Like, what are you teaching them if you're not teaching
Why aren't you teaching them magma rock science down there in Argentina? Well, first of all, I'm not pulling anyone out of school. The kids who are showing up on these trips, they are already legally homeschoolers in the United States, or they are legally attending some sort of private independent school. And so I'm not doing anything, shady as far as I'm aware. But when people say, what do they learn down there? They often think, what is being taught in the realm of academics? And I say, oh, no, 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 I don't do that. First of all, I'm not a subject expert. And second of all, there's lots of other great programs and opportunities if you want to learn about magma rocks, or you want to learn about the history of South America or something like that. And I try to give them this experience that they're not going to easily find elsewhere, which is to go down and essentially wander around foreign cities and towns and try to figure out what's worth doing there. And so I take groups of actually kind of young teenagers, and we do have some basic safety rules and protocols. But they will go out and they'll wander around Buenos Aires, or they will go out on little adventures on their own on the South Island of New Zealand. Or, I can paint lots of other pictures, but the idea is I give them this sense of independence and actual freedom coupled with responsibility to go and experience the world. And then we come back and they always have a kind of a safe place to talk about what happened. I make sure they have a place to stay, they have food. I provide the basics, but then they get to author the experiences within reasonable safety boundaries on these trips.
That's awesome, man. And what value do you think this has? Again, you're 6 weeks out of school. They're missing all this stuff with the math and the trigonometry. Why would somebody, send their kid to you? And what's it like afterwards for the kids? What benefits do they say that they get from it?
So it's just like asking, what is the benefit of going and traveling in Southeast Asia for 3 months? Like, wow, how do you answer that question? What are the tangible benefits? Because someone who goes and does that, and they don't do it as part of some big package tour, they don't have someone else making all the hard decisions for them. They will come back from 3 months of independent travel a changed person. How do you quantify that? How do you label it? It's difficult, but it's definitely going to be higher level of independence and self-confidence. The ability to say, okay, there's an uncertain situation, but I can probably figure out most of these problems. And if I can't figure it out, then I will marshal the resources or find other people to solve these problems. So for teenagers that are like stuck, they get off on the wrong subway stop in Buenos Aires. It's like, okay, this is not a life-threatening situation. I am a bit anxious. How do I figure this out? I mean, these are transferable life skills, if you want to call them that will matter a lot in both career and non-career pursuits for the rest of their lives.
I totally and 100% agree with you. I was just playing devil's advocate because one of the things I hear that actually really riles me up, so silly, is like I asked somebody who's a math teacher. I said, I understand the importance of academic math up to a point. You got to learn to add, subtract. You should learn how to do your taxes. You don't learn that, right? But this for people like you and me who you thought you were going to be a scientist, but you weren't. But I took pre-calc, right? I took these advanced mathematical classes, and students are taking all of these random classes. I say it's like trivia. It's just a bunch of trivia. Like there's nothing practical in school. You're learning a random fact about the Civil War, a battle. You're learning battle dates. You're memorizing, learning how to graph functions. Most of those students aren't going to go on to be engineers or use that knowledge or information. And the reasoning behind this bizarre curriculum that's in every high school, every academic or person I've met or teacher says this: it teaches kids how to think. And especially about math, they're like, it teaches you problem solving skills. And I said, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard from a math person, right? Why would you just teach the person how to solve problems in life? Why wouldn't you have a problem solving class or experience like what you're describing? Because the average person, if you've just spent 4 years learning academic math and then you're going to go work at Denny's or you're going to work in an office, you're not going to become a scientist, right? And you spent 4 years doing math equations, and then you're in the subway in Buenos Aires. It's not directly transferable. There's no indication that you're going to have any idea how to figure out what subway stop. That's why so many of these kids who graduate with academic aptitude are just clueless in the real world. But what you're doing, I think it makes much more sense, is to actually take the kid to the situation in life and make them solve the problems. And that's called problem solving skills. So good work.
Thanks. Yeah, and I don't want to completely throw away the idea that school and formal education environments can teach thinking, but it's a rare thing. It's a rare occurrence. And people have the same argument for exposure. It's like kids need to know what's out there in the world. And so they need to take a year of chemistry in high school, or they need to take an entire year of yeah, insert any of the subject titles here. And I think, do you really need to take a year of chemistry to understand that chemistry exists and it's an important subject that human civilization relies upon? No, you could have 2 weeks of just like, here's all the cool stuff that's been done in chemistry. Here are like a few basic things that if you're not aware of this, you will truly be an intellectually impoverished person. You could accomplish that in so much less time than high schools typically suck up from young people's lives. And I think that is what I've been doing battle against ever since I got into this field, which is wasting the time, the precious time of young people in school. And when I say what's school for, it's clearly not for engaging young people or helping them figure out what they're into, because so much of it is just a holding chamber, just saying, we don't know what else to do with you in society, so just stay here and do these problem sets and hopefully like don't hurt anyone.
Absolutely. I felt that way about the same way about the education system. And also when people would say to me like about college, and I would list like 1,000 reasons why college is a very bad idea for the average person. And then somebody would inevitably go, well, what else are they supposed to do? And I would say that is the laziest, most unimaginative response. You're saying you're going to tell a person they should do this terribly ineffective thing because you can't think of something else to do. I can give you a million things better to do. And also, this exposure thing is you're right, it's such nonsense because a year is too long. And I remember chemistry. I like to show people, I don't think you can see it. I have a stain on my arm. It's a hydrochloric acid stain from chemistry class when I was 17. I spilled hydrochloric acid. Now, I really was thinking like, how dumb was it that I spent a year of my life in a lab coat learning chemistry? I was never, ever going to work in anything related to chemistry. And it's not taught in the way you're describing either. These classes are not taught from the world of wonderment. I mean, even Breaking Bad, I mean, the speeches that Walter White gives in Breaking Bad about chemistry and his poetic sort of ramblings about chemistry are more poetic than what you'd ever get in a high school chemistry class for real. You know, that's Hollywood. You get in there, you open up the textbook, they're like, memorize the table of elements, and here's how a molecule, here, and then they're just teaching you this stuff with no context. And I think that's why for young people, school is so frustrating because they are in it, their minds are developing and they want to learn stuff. And that's how I was. I wanted context. I remember asking my math teacher, and this is why it still bothered me, is when I was learning to graph functions, I just said, what is this for? When am I going to use this? And I wasn't even trying to be like a smart ass. I was just like, literally, can you tell me? I thought in the adult world, maybe there's a time when you're at the grocery store and you need to graph a function. And she couldn't tell me. And that's when it's frustrating. It's just completely theoretical. So I think, the other thing about education is so funny. There's such a consensus that it's not working. Like even amongst educators, there should be a lot more I think a lot more focus on the types of things that you're doing. So I'm curious, based on everything you said, like can you give me some examples of what it's like for kids after they do one of your programs? What do they experience in their lives after doing, this type of independent skill building?
Sure. I don't want to take credit for offering some sort of comprehensive educational program for young people. These kids are already doing their own thing. They are self-directed learners. They typically use a blend of some sort of structured learning with a lot of unstructured learning. And so maybe take some online classes. A lot of them sign up for community college classes starting around age 16. It depends on which direction they feel themselves going in. And so what I offer are these hopefully life-shaping travel programs that will make a big difference in the sort of soft skills that we were talking about earlier. But
Right.
for them, a lot of them do end up going on to higher education. A lot of them choose not to go to higher education right away. And then some of them choose never to go to higher education. And so I've worked with a lot of teenagers since 2008. And so a lot of them are in their 20s, some are in their 30s now. And so I've seen them go lots of different places. But the punchline is that this alternative education route, the self-directed learning, does not automatically turn them into geniuses or superstars or top performers. I mean, they turn out to be fairly normal people, kind of relevant to the socioeconomic upbringing that they come from. for the research I did for my last book, it was pretty clear that choosing an alternative school or a homeschooling route is not going to significantly help or hinder a young person's long-term outcomes. And so that's something that I actually find really reassuring, which means you can just, if you're a parent, you can just pay attention to the mental health of the young person who's in front of you. And if it makes more sense to take one of these alternative routes, then take one of the alternative routes. But they go on to fairly like normal paths.
So, and I know this is speaking into you, right? When people hear the word homeschooler, there is a stigma of like some weird person that's like staying at home with their parents and they're kind of not, not as normal as the kids going to school. That's a kind of an exaggeration, but I know that's
Sure.
like a stereotype you might have heard. But what I wanted to get into is like, so do the students, when they take in your program, do the parents or students thank you, or what do they say they've learned from this experience?
Yeah, sometimes I just don't hear anything afterwards. And so it's a big question mark. But other times, a young person comes back with a really renewed sense of confidence. They come back with like new forms of social awareness and interpersonal skills. And so it's all these ways of like how to navigate the world, how to navigate uncertain landscapes. And where do you learn this stuff? Where does the average teenager get taught or get the experience to learn on their own these kinds of skills? Like if you're lucky, for me, I felt lucky because I got to go to a wilderness summer camp for a number of summers when I was a teenager. I also got to go spend a month living with a homestay family in Chile when I was 14. And those were the places where I got to like rapidly push my comfort zone and bloom. And for the rest of the year, it was kind of like, okay, we're just sort of getting through things now. We're just waiting to check off the boxes in school. There were some highlights, but they were so infrequent. They were not condensed like those summer camp or the travel experiences.
I think it's really great that the research indicates that, or concludes that whether you're homeschooled or you go to a regular high school, your long-term results are essentially the same. It means that people who are considering an alternative route don't have to worry. It's not like you're missing out on anything by not ingesting the state-approved curriculum and all this stuff. You really do have this freedom to choose the way that you want to be educated or the way that you want your kids to be educated. And I was inspired by your story of what happened when you were in Chile as a 14-year-old. I mean, myself too, I remember high school too. It was a blur. And there were these peak moments randomly where there would be an unconventional experience that I learned so much more from those real world experiences. And a lot of people say you go to college to be well-rounded, which drives me insane because I was like, that's not what well-rounded is. It's taking a class on this or that. It's not well-rounded. So you've done a lot of work with K through 12, and now you're starting to go into the college age kids, correct?
Yeah, I'm starting to focus my writing more towards those in their early 20s, and especially those maybe like the ones who are coming to you for your programs, Seth, that are really not interested in a conventional career or conventional life. They want to play the game on their own rules. And so that's something I'm working on right now. It's an active writing project.
That's great. And what kind of advice? So like you got an audience of people like that on my channel. It's like, what kind of advice are you giving people in this book? Like what are you just speaking to, going outside of college, or are you giving them the same type of like real world type advice, like life skill type advice that you providing in these camps?
Yeah, I think it is actually not that important whether you go to college or not for this kind of advice, but it is connected to all the work I've done with unschooling. And when I think about a teenager who really should be an unschooler, this is a teenager who's waking up each morning sick to their stomach about where they have to go today and what they have to do. And like the system that they are being asked to participate in does not make sense to them. There's, like you said, these peak experiences, these wonderful parts of the education system are so few and far between that it really just slowly crushes them until they're like, why am I even getting up today? Where am I going? I think, we could talk about the actual existing mental health crisis among adolescents, but this is something that's existed for a long time with the school system. And so I'm interested in asking those same questions about people in their early 20s who are starting to go into a traditional career, and they're waking up on Monday mornings and saying, what am I about to go and do today? What is the point of all of this? And is this really what life is about? Because what unschoolers have shown to me is that you can spend most of your time doing the stuff that you love, and then a little bit of time on the other side of things, maybe checking off the boxes of unpleasant stuff that you have to do, even though you don't really want to. School gives you this vision of life where most of it is checking off unpleasant boxes and a little bit of doing what you love. And I really think that the whole script should be flipped upside down. And so a lot of what I'm writing about has connections to entrepreneurialism, has connections to how to spend your free time, how to spend your money in a way that does not immediately lead you back into this work, produce, consume cycle. And I draw a lot from my own life and my own minor successes and many false starts and failures, trying to sustain myself as a self-employed person and as someone who spends a lot of time traveling, adventuring, making new friends, not just sitting in front of my screen all day, although I'm sure I do that too much anyways, and trying to have a meaningful life and one that doesn't play by the traditional rules.
That's awesome, man. I think you really, I like that your work is getting to this point, because that's really, life becomes ongoing school, not school, but ongoing learning. And I think you're right. I mean, entrepreneurship is really the end result of somebody who is actively engaged in life for the most part. I mean, there are some people who do thrive in a 9-to-5 job. In fact, many of my students really enjoy their digital marketing jobs because those jobs are changing every day and there's a lot of engagement. But there are a lot of people at these soul-sucking jobs that are very repetitive, and you're just not alive when you're not actively engaging with something every day. And you've created your own life, this whole unschooling system, these books. It's really inspiring. And I think it's cool you're going to be teaching young people how to do that. And you do learn, if in school you are trained not to just be a sheep, then there's more of a chance that you will not be a sheep when you get older. I wanted to dig in a little more to what you were saying. I was reading some of the stories you had about students. So like, for anyone watching this, I know, I did well in school just because I was I was just kind of in my DNA. I didn't like school, but I was good at it. But there's a lot of people really struggle with the school system. And so when you're dealing with like a 14 or 15-year-old, what kind of stories do you have about the type of person that would maybe be a good candidate for an alternative approach? Like what are they dealing with?
Sometimes you see kids, maybe like you or I were at age 14, seemingly highly functional in the school system, but still a bit dead inside. And those are the ones that often slip under the radar because they can get decent grades. And so everyone says, oh, they're doing fine. And so sometimes you see that. I'd say more often you see kids who are presenting with anxiety and depression. You see kids who are presenting with resistance, or what people now label school refusal. And these are the kids who maybe were much more bright-eyed and curious about life just some years ago. And now they're deadened and shuffling their feet towards school every morning. And so those are the ones who are showing pretty obvious indicators of like needing something different. It's difficult sometimes if you live in a rural area where the public school is the only option, and then maybe there's some very expensive private school that's still a conventional type of school, then you may not have many other options. That's why I've become more of a fan of homeschooling and unschooling, because in the United States, at least, it's legal in all 50 states. It's largely unregulated, and it's something that anyone can choose regardless of where they live. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy, because you might still be isolated, and it might be difficult to find opportunities to hang out face-to-face with other kids. School, kind of like college, does unfortunately have a monopoly on large groups of other kids around your same age, and that's a difficult practical problem to deal with.
I think you just spoke, and also, of course, homeschooling, you have to have at least one parent that can stay home and isn't working.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, for teenagers, that's not necessarily true. For younger kids, that's definitely more true. Yeah. But yes, there is, more attention that's required. During the pandemic, Seth, there was this New York Times headline that just spelled out the purpose of school so clearly to me. It said, schools must reopen so parents can go back to work. And it's like, aha, that's what school is really for.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just daycare.
Well, parents, more and more, you need to have two parents working in order to have what many consider to be a normal lifestyle in the US. And so what are you going to do with your kids? It's a very serious practical problem for adults. And school works wonderfully. And school does provide a basic social welfare function for a lot of kids who are in some form of poverty or don't really have parents who are there and care about them. And so like we can say that's a purpose of school also, but let's not fool ourselves and say that kids are learning deeply about all the subjects that are being crammed down their throats.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had this, I don't have kids, but when I thought about it or talked about it, when I've been in relationships, I mean, this is a big concern of mine. I was like, where the heck are the kids going to go to school? Who am I? For me, I was like, who am I going to trust with my kid for 8 hours a day? I can't. A teacher? Like I don't, the type of, the quality of the teacher in a public school, you really can't predict. And they're essentially, raising your kids in many ways, because kids are learning all these non-academic, skills along with, and they are socializing, but they're also, the thing I realized from when I was in public school growing up, I'm in all different types of people. I'll try to keep it polite. Like, we had our circle of friends, and then you go to public school, and I remember meeting some real degenerates. I mean, to be honest with you,
well, socialization can go either way, right? There can be
right.
positive socialization and there can be negative socialization. And I had
a
very similar experience in Southern California going to my giant public high school.
Yeah. When I was in where I grew up before I moved to this better, like kind of a suburb that had a better school system, I remember the environment was so hostile. And actually, if you did well in school there, you were made fun of and sometimes beaten up.
Yeah.
It was not a good motivator for doing
Yeah. Is that a pro-learning, pro-expanding your mind type of environment? Questionable.
Right. Absolutely. So I wanted to dig more into what were you saying? What is this school refusal? I've never heard that term. So what is that? Is that like a diagnosis by a therapist of some kind, or is it what is that word?
I think that term comes from Japan, where there are teens who will simply lock themselves in their room in protest of going to school because it's such an unpleasant or anxiety-provoking experience. And so I don't think it's quite as popular here. There is a movement that's been around for quite a while called test refusal, which is anti-standardized testing.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, and so it's just another label we can put on the same phenomena, which is, why am I being forced to go to this institution that appears to be wasting most of my time? Like, what's in it for me? I think young people are very astute. They're very astute about what adults are doing around them. They're very socially conscious, especially adolescents. And they know when they're just being shuffled off to a place where they're kept busy for 7 hours a day. And like, you can feel that in your bones. Like you say, I am wasting my time here. And so that is what is at the root of whatever we might call school refusal or test refusal. It's like, who is this serving?
Right. So what most people would probably ask at this point is say, this sounds very nice, but we need engineers, we need doctors, we need lawyers, we need, these professions. And how, I know I'm playing devil's advocate because I never say this stuff, but how do you teach what is actually, necessary to do certain careers in terms of the academics, along with this kind of approach to education?
Yeah. Listen, we have no problem with figuring out how to teach stuff, right? Like we know how to teach engineers, we know how to teach people who are going into medicine or insert any other field here. Like, there's always ways to make it a little bit better. And for newer fields like digital marketing, maybe like actually people really suck at teaching it because it's so new. But the problem is not teaching, it's learning. And the question is, how do you match motivated learners to the resources, whether it's teachers or it's books or courses or something else, that they can excel in quickly, naturally, without anyone using sticks or carrots to try to motivate them? That is the kind of world I want to live in which people are intrinsically motivated, for the most part, to do whatever they're doing or what they're learning or working on. And so forget about teaching. It's like, there are plenty of ways that if you want to learn something, you can learn it today. And so it's more about solving this tricky kind of psychological, social problem of how do you figure out what you are interested in, what you will be highly motivated to to work on. I mean, this is the problem. This is the very difficult problem that these unschoolers are working on starting at a very young age. I mean, most kids who go through school, they don't have to tackle this problem until they're done with high school or done with college or maybe even done with graduate school. Whereas the 14-year-old unschooler is figuring out like, okay, like there's this whole world of resources and opportunities. I just need to figure out which little part of this world I should dial into. And then once I feel that intrinsic motivation, then I will take off like a rocket.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you. And but you put it really well, because I really feel like after 14, high school is it's a waste for most students. But it's also not, like you said, they're not helping a person figure out what they're interested in. They're just throwing a bunch of random topics at everybody. And the person who happens to be gifted or moved towards math or science or something, they do well. And then there's a whole bunch of people like me and you who, like for me, I wanted to be a filmmaker. That was my thing, which wasn't taught well in the schools I went to. But most people end up, they question, I'm still figuring it out. I don't know what I want to be. I don't know what I want to major in, they say in college, which I think is insane. They commit to this huge financial investment in college without knowing what you're going to study. It's just so counterintuitive. And then, when you're 22, you go, okay, well, what do I want to be when I grow up? Now, I've been in school for 16 years. I'm going to start tackling this topic. And a lot of people go right back to school and grad school. But you could start doing that at 14 and it makes a lot more sense.
And the problem of self-knowledge takes so much time and experimenting and meeting lots of different people and exploring paths that become dead ends. To expect someone at age 22, even someone without student loan debt at age 22, to immediately be able to make any headway into this problem of self-knowledge and figuring out what will actually motivate you, what is a good place for you in this world, when all of a sudden you need to get a job and you need to start paying your bills. It's ludicrous. It is truly ludicrous.
That's man, I 100% agree. I was like, this
time start early.
Start early. When your parents are still paying for your rent and your food, that's the best time. That, I've thought that for a long time. I even put, that's what my book talks about, but you put it really well. It's absolutely insane, because once that financial pressure, and I try to convey to these people watching my videos, just, you don't know what financial pressure is until you get out of college. You don't know. It's going to hit you like Evander Holyfield's uppercut. I mean, you're going to be knocked out and you're going to be stressed out beyond, you've never felt stressed like that in your life. And it's unfortunate. So that's a good point. So what do you see? Do you see anything changing in the world? Do you see you've been doing this for 20 or 10 or 20 years, I think. Have you seen any positive changes, anything that gives you hope for the future?
Well, I've spent a lot of time traveling. I've spent a lot of time living in Europe in recent years, and the United States is still a pretty awesome place to go for having lots of different educational pathways and different ways to kind of find your way into different, very niche careers. And for example, here in Europe, you can have completely free college, your tuition paid for by the state. Maybe you pay $500 or $1,000 for a year. It's essentially a drop in the bucket compared to the US. But the ways that you can kind of move in between the K through 12 system and the higher education system, the number of alternative pathways you have here is much more limited. So I'm recording to you from Germany, where it is fully illegal to be homeschooled, like 100%, no exceptions, unless you're like, a bubble boy and you can't, leave your chamber. And so it's very interesting to see how other parts of the world try to tackle this same problem. In the US, I still have hope, because homeschooling is still very lightly regulated in most of the states. There are a few states where you need to act a bit more conscientious about mimicking the school curriculum and taking tests more regularly. But for the most part, it's still this wide open, almost Wild West type environment of educational options. I think the community college system in the US is a wonderful institution that does not exist in many other parts of the world, including here in Europe. There's just not something quite similar to it. And that lets I see this with the teenagers I've worked with, that lets them dabble with college level studies for, they can do it part-time, they can do just one class a semester, they can pay just a little bit of money or nothing at all to do that. And then you get a taste of whether college is right for you, instead of doing this jump in, all or nothing, put down money and time on the line, kind of pressure cooker that we expect these 18-year-olds to be making up their minds about. So these are some of the reasons I still feel hopeful, and there are other reasons I don't feel hopeful, but you didn't ask me about those.
No. Well, I've listed enough of those on the channel. That's really great, man. I gotta be honest with you. I'm happy to hear that there's actually something better in the US about education at all. And I never knew that. I didn't know homeschooling was illegal in Europe. Is it just Germany, or is it all the whole continent?
I think Germany is most strict, but lots of other countries, it's almost illegal. It's like quasi-legal, or you really have to beg for special permission from the government to do it, and they will oftentimes say no to you. And so yeah, it's US, Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, a lot of these sort of like Anglosphere countries have this more rich tradition of letting families take these paths.
It's so interesting because I always think, because obviously college is more affordable in Europe, but it's good to know. Yeah, I mean, it's an important right to have, to be able. I mean, I always thought it was that was the thing that freaked me out about. Actually, I didn't even realize that in the US would be better than Europe. I'm glad to know that, because I'm a global citizen like you, and I've been interested in Europe. I'm going to go there next year. And I kind of, if I ever have kids, I would need to know that, actually being in the US would give me more options in terms of what I could do with my own kids. I hate this idea of, I have to put my kids in this terrible local school. That's why, that's honestly, I'm sure why people go to private schools, and
Seth, I recommend that you and other people like you check out the term world schooling, because there are a lot of families who have like a legal presence in the US, and their kid is legally homeschooled or going to some highly flexible private alternative school there. But then they're living abroad and traveling frequently and temporarily residing in other countries. And so there are families out there that are taking advantage of the legal freedoms for family education in the US while still not living primarily in the United States.
Really? I want to hear more. I'm curious about that. I actually have a friend who lives in the UK who has a little girl, and they have that issue, which is that they want to be traveling, but they're not quite sure what to do in terms of her education. But I know most people watching this video are not parents yet, I don't think. Some are, but you guys are, you're more in, you're in the educational system. I really liked, again, just going back to it, I really liked how you phrased that it is a problem to solve. Like, what am I going to do with my life? What am I going to create? It's a creative problem to solve. And I think, I'm always inspired when I get emails from people who are very, very young, who are doing this. So just back to your experience, you said you've traveled a lot and you've done a lot of these programs. So like, where have you done these programs? You do them all in South America? You do them in New Zealand, you said? Like,
I have a special place in my heart for South America, because that's where I had my quarter-life crisis and ran away for 3 months at age 24. But New Zealand has been a great destination. We've done trips to Nepal and Southeast Asia, went to Australia, went to Spain. I'm taking a group down to Patagonia soon, and trying to bring another group to Berlin later in 2023. And these trips are often chosen and shaped around my personal travel interests and goals, and the goals of the other adults that I hire to work with me. And these are one and done creations. And I find that is a highly motivating setup for me and the other trip leaders, as well as the young people who are coming, because everyone is excited to do this one thing that's only going to happen once. And then poof, it's gone, it disappears. It's a Snapchat. And
it's exciting. So you have helpers with you. I thought I got the sense you were saying you did this yourself, which I thought was kind of nuts. But
I'm a solopreneur. I own my business, but I would not think about taking a group of teenagers to a foreign country for a long period without at least one other highly reliable adult next to me.
Yes,
too.
That makes sense. It sounds like fun, man.
It is fun. It's a ton of fun. I mean, it's stressful and it's work, and it's my chosen form of suffering. This is how I now like to describe the entrepreneurial journey. Other people think being stuck with a group of teenagers for 6 weeks, living in hostels, that sounds like their nightmare. And for me, coming from a summer camp background, I'm like, this is my kind of nightmare. I will gladly take this on.
Have you,
So,
it sounds like fun to me. What I'm wondering, you did say like the excitement of doing these once, but I mean, have you ever thought about doing it more regularly, like with the same, like if you're, like we were talking about peak experiences, right? In high school, and I actually thought about that too. I was like, yeah, you have this peak experience, you have one really great teacher out of 20, it's a great experience, but it also leaves you wanting more. Have you ever thought about doing something more consistent where you're going to get together with the same group of kids like once a year or something like that, or have some type of, do you do any virtual stuff afterwards to stay in touch with them?
yeah, I mean, I've dabbled with coaching programs and with offering a micro school during the pandemic that was online. And for me, the motivation comes from knowing that something is short term and it'll only be here for a while. That's why I love summer camps. I feel like everyone just like gives everything they have to a summer camp type experience. And so, yes, I understand the appeal and the need for ongoing regular programs, but I don't think that's my place in this world, or at least not yet.
Well, at the same time, I mean, you're kind of emulating what is appealing about college, that is, and I love that you're doing it. I think we need more of that, because college, I really, obviously I wrote a whole book about the problems with college, from the outdated way of teaching, the outdated curriculums, the price, all these other things. But what you can't compete with, as you said, is the gathering of other young people in a social environment, and I always say, it's just like a very expensive summer camp where nobody really cares about the classes. You're just there to socialize. And people do look at college as this like peak experience where they say, oh, your college will be the best years of your life, which I always say is kind of a terrible thing to tell a person who's 20, because then they've got 60 or 70 more years of what? Not
It's
the
even
best.
worse if you think high school was the best years of your life, right?
Right.
If that's your peak, that's a long downward slope.
It really is. I really think that is one of the weirdest platitudes I would ever, because I mean, for me and you, I mean, I think especially when you're an entrepreneur, like for me, my life is much better now than it was in my 20s. But I think it's great you're giving people this direct experience. If anybody's watching the interview and you're in high school, or you're a parent of a high school, like how do people, it sounds like this is kind of exclusive. I mean, how many students do you bring at a time, and how do people sign up?
Well, the company is called Unschool Adventures. The website's unschooladventures.com. And yeah, they're small group trips. They're exclusive. But it's open applications. I will accept anyone who shows like motivation and like basic preparation. This is not your first time away from home, in other words, who wants to go on one of these trips. And it's fascinating to me. Oftentimes these trips will get just enough applications to run to be financially viable, but not a lot more. And so it is still a fairly niche thing. And I insist on offering programs during the school year. And that makes sure that I have people who are, alternatively educated and more likely to be self-directed. And I'm in it for that. And a lot of people say, offer some programs during the summer. I'm like, no, there's so many other companies that offer great programs for young people during the summer. I'd rather just not compete and just take my little merry band of weirdos off on our cool trips and call it a day.
That's awesome, man. And so yeah, guys, if you're in high school or someone in high school, I mean, yeah, it sounds like very exclusive in that way. Sounds like you like your niche. And you're right. I mean, I was thinking about that. I said, yeah, I mean, if you did it during the summer, you would be competing, and you would get more public school people who might not be as self-reliant or self-motivated. And it is a unique thing. I'm thinking of myself and the people I knew when we were in high school. I mean, I did summer programs, and it is like an extension of school. You're like, okay, wake up at 7, and you're kind of, you were never given like a time where they were like, okay, go to Buenos Aires and find your way.
Go wander around, just don't get injured, come back at dinner time.
Yeah.
It's like parenting in the 1970s, except in Argentina.
Yeah. So I think it's really cool that you like to do in-person stuff. That's like, obviously we're learning more and more how important it is to have like personal, social skills and interaction. So what Aren't you doing something next summer in Europe, or you're like a cyclist and you're going to be doing some kind of tour in the future, or is that not public knowledge yet? Did I jump the gun?
No. I write publicly about this. Yeah. Another reason that I only like to run a few of these trips a year is because I go off my own travel adventures. And in recent years, I have been into long distance cycling. And so last year I cycled from Germany down to Portugal. And earlier this year, I cycled from Portugal back almost all the way to Germany. And a year from now, so late 2023, I'm intending to cycle from essentially through the Andes down in Patagonia, down where Argentina and Chile meet. And that is something that's been on my bucket list for a long time. And it might continue, it might turn into a cycling book tour for the book that I'm working on right now for people in their 20s, because that sounds like an adventure for me. It'll probably be going from college town to college town because, as we've already discussed, that's just the easiest practical way to find large congregations of young people. But man, I want to run talks that are open to everyone in the public, not just college students. So yeah, that's what I'm scheming right now, Seth.
I think it's exciting, man, and I will be more than excited to join you via video and watch you cycle that much, because I will not. I was saying you should definitely document that, and what I guess what are you going to say? So these are kids who are already in college. They've already invested. They're already into the educational system. What are you going to be teaching those kids? Are you talking to them about the career stuff we mentioned, like, how to make sure you don't have a conventional or unsatisfying career?
Yeah. So I imagine that when you're roughly 22 and you've finished your formal education and you're saying, which direction should I go now? You have so many paths that can lead you towards a perilous cycle of getting stuck somewhere. And I think this involves committing to a lifestyle that's very expensive right off the bat, saying like, I need to have a nice apartment. I need to start having stuff. I need to have furnishings. If you start working with people who have high incomes, your spending tends to rise to match their spending also. That is a trap to be definitely avoided. And I think that it's never too early to think about entrepreneurial paths. I think a lot of young people say, I'm really interested in this type of work or this career, but it's just too much. It's all encompassing. It's all demanding. I don't want to be working 60 hours a week for this company, at least not for very long. And so how do you escape that trap? How do you find a well-compensated, meaningful type of work that is also not full-time? Like, I think the interesting creative question for people in their 20s is, how can you find a $100,000 a year career and only work 1/4 of the year? How can you just work for 3 months, make $25,000, live well on $25,000, and then have 9 months, give or take, to be doing other stuff that's actually meaningful and important to you? Now, anyone who figures out that conundrum is someone I want to talk to. And that is the kind of lifestyle that I find compelling and interesting and difficult. And in the same way that unschooling involves a whole lot of self-knowledge, to be able to pull off something like that, where you are creating massive amounts of time wealth for yourself, that requires a lot of self-knowledge and experimentation also. So that's what I'm interested in promoting.
That's really great, man. I mean, we could probably have a whole other conversation about that just from the entrepreneurial standpoint, which is to say, you're right, you can get very creative with your earning. That's actually a really good point. And I do have a lot of my students freelance, and a lot of students end up setting up their own online e-commerce stores or doing other types of online businesses. But one of the things I realized that, yeah, there is this template that is like 60K a year, 70K a year, 80K a year. And I promote that and it works for a lot of people, but that is then you're trading your time for that money. And you're right, like making 25K or 30K, but you were saying 25K a quarter or a year?
So if you make 100,000 a year, just work 1/4 of the year, take 1/4 of the money. So $25,000 made in 3 months.
Right. I see what you're saying. Well, yeah, I mean, that's what it is. That's totally doable. I remember I had a sales opportunity once where it was selling diamonds in Alaska, and it was basically going to be, I didn't end up doing it because it was pretty intense, but it was basically like 10 weeks of like nonstop work to make $40,000 minimum in commissions. And then I was thinking about the e-commerce and the online world, which is where everybody's very focused on these high numbers. But you're like, what if you only want to make 30K a year, 40K a year? And that actually is what inspired me about entrepreneurship in the first place. Because when I started doing film teaching back in the day, I was making, I don't know, $12,000-$15,000 a year on my online course, and it wasn't enough to live on. But I was like, it's half of what I would need to live on.
Yeah.
Very
You
close.
can still live as a single healthy person in the United States on $25,000 a year. Anyone who thinks you can't pull that off, I think, has some form of inflated standards or hasn't gotten around enough.
Well, I would actually like to get more in depth on that. Maybe we'll do a separate video, because I don't understand how I haven't lived in the US for a while, but I also know everything's gone up in price. So I wonder, this is like, you're talking about like minimalism, right? I mean, that's the fancy term for it.
Yeah,
or is it?
a form of minimalism. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's great, man. I think this, practical minimalism, I think you should be able to be intentional with it, like you're saying, this is what I want to do, not, I think some people just end up living on whatever they make without an intention. They're just like, oh, I'm broke, so this is what I live with. And it's not part of like an inspired creation, but the whole conversation is very inspiring. And I think we should have another talk about that. But generally speaking, I think what you're doing is great. And, I read your book a while ago, so I think it's really, this is funny, guys. You guys, when I interview you, you're all like, it's cool to meet me. I've been wanting to meet Blake for a long time because I read his book, I don't know, years ago. And I actually think it's funny because I didn't know how to, I was Facebook friends with one of your friends. And I was like thinking you had an agent or something. And I just sent you a Facebook message. You wrote me back like right away. We set up the interview. I don't know why I didn't do that a few years ago.
I'm a big fan of reaching out to strangers and connecting with people. And you caught me at a good time also, Seth. I'm not in the middle of running a team program. So it all worked out.
But I think definitely again, videotape it, because we'll talk again, and I'd love to have some footage to show of what you're doing, because I think it's really awesome. So guys, Blake's website is Unschooling Adventures.
Nope, unschooladventures.com. And for all of the stuff related to my writing and everything else, it's just my name, blakeboles.com.
Cool. I will put those links under the video description. Is there anything else you want to say to anybody watching before we finish the interview?
If you want to stay in touch, I write an awesome monthly newsletter. It's very low bandwidth, and I recommend that you sign up. And that's it. Thanks for the opportunity, Seth.
My pleasure, Blake. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for sharing your story and what you're up to, and we'll stay in touch.
Bye.